All right, let's talk a little bit about dairy. Should you be consuming it or should you not? Now, if you're a vegan, obviously, or you're listening to vegan activists, they'll tell you it's the worst thing in the world, that cows are raped and tortured and beaten, and it's full of pus and blood, and why would you drink milk mammary secretions from another animal, and on and on and on. So, there's a lot of vegan nonsense out there. And if you want to, get the actual sort of real data on what actually happens inside a dairy farm, I suggest you follow the following accounts. You can follow on Instagram, TDF Honest Farming, that's Derek Josie's account. You can follow the Iowa Dairy Farmer or Dan Ventiker's account, or you can follow the New Mexico Milkmaid, Tara Van Duzen's account. You can also follow Big Farmer Andy in Australia, and that's Andy, I don't know what Andy's last name is. So anyway, they've got some really good information on how dairy is actually, what goes into dairy production. It's not anything as the vegans would have you say, or believe if you listen to those guys. So it's nice to see, this is the real world stuff. So, all right, aside from that, we know that there are many people in the world that just can't tolerate dairy. They're lactose intolerant. That affects large populations, parts of Africa, parts of Asia typically in Europe and North America. Most people, depending on their sort of heritage, tolerate dairy at least to a degree. The country that drinks the most dairy, or the countries that drink the most dairy, are Scandinavian. I shouldn't say drink, I should say eat the most or consume the most dairy. Scandinavia is clearly the leader in that, and they have very long life expectancies. Now, is that the cause, or does it contribute to that? Hard to say. There's so many things that go into life expectancy, but it doesn't seem to be shortening their life to any significant degree if we can look at that data in that regard. And so, do I consume dairy? A lot of people will want to know that. I'll talk about that here towards the end. But what I've seen over the years, and I've seen a lot of people doing elimination diets, carnivore diets, some of them include dairy successfully, some do not. And so I think, unfortunately, there's no one size fits all, or this is the answer. There are, if we look at the purpose of dairy in general, it's for growth, right? This is why humans produce dairy to nourish and grow our babies. That's why cows do it. This is why, dairy that we consume typically as human beings, obviously we start out with breast milk. I don't know if you technically consider that dairy, but anyway, and then there's the bovine or the cow version, there's sheep's milk, there's goat's milk. Some people consume camel's milk, and perhaps a few other animals that people milk, I'm not sure, but these are the major ones. And certainly cows, by far and away, are the largest dairy producers in the world. Dairy production has taken millions and billions of people and provided them with high quality bioavailable protein and high quality fats and high quality nutrition. And there's carbohydrates in dairy too, for you guys that may not realize that. Dairy is, it's an animal product, but it has all three macronutrients. One of the reasons it's so good for promoting growth. If you are trying to, if we look at, say for instance, if we look at things like the PDCAAS or the DIAAS, these are protein digestibility and availability comparisons. Dairy protein is up there. It is always at the top. Whether it's a milk isolate or a whey protein, dairy protein is some of the most bioavailable and well absorbed and just very, very good quality protein. There's no doubt about that. Now, if you are trying to put on weight and size, dairy protein or dairy in general can be a good thing to do. If you are trying to lose weight, dairy, particularly in significant amounts, can have the opposite effect. It's not going to help you lose weight that much. Dairy is not particularly satiating. Okay, so you can overconsume it very easily, particularly drinking calories. I often, people ask me about drinking milk or raw milk, and I say, look, it depends. If you're trying to lose weight and lean out, drinking your calories is often going to be a poor choice for you. It's interesting, in the world, we see actually dairy consumption has gone up over the last several decades, but milk consumption has gone down. Now, some of that has to do with some of these quote-unquote plant milks, which aren't anything near the product. I mean, if you compare them nutritionally, they're not even close, and they are just complete garbage in my view. But some people like to use them because they don't tolerate dairy for whatever reason. They like the taste. Dairy obviously tastes good. A lot of us like it in different products, ice creams, cheeses, yogurts, kefirs, things like that, and then just plain old milk, creams and things like that. There are a number of different types of dairy out there, obviously. Some people will tolerate some better than others. If we just look across the board in general categories. In my experience, the people that tend to have the most, if they have issues with dairy, it's plain old milk. Just drinking milk can cause them to bloat, have digestive issues. Some people develop rashes associated with this. Again, this isn't the majority of people. There's certainly some people out there where that certainly is the case. We go from milk to things like yogurts and kefirs and things like that. Again, these products can be, obviously a lot of additional ingredients can be put in there. Sugars and things like that, thickeners, stabilizers, the gelum gums and the carrageenans and the polysorbate 80s and things like that, all of which have sort of questionable health implications. I think a lot of people think we'd probably do better without those things, and I probably tend to agree with that. It's hard to find. Sometimes it's hard to find dairy that doesn't have that stuff. There are people that are advocates of raw dairy, and now raw dairy is illegal in many places in the United States, and I'm not sure what the rules are in different countries, but I know certain states will allow you to sell and consume raw dairy. Some of them you have to do it under the guise of for pets only, and then people get around it that way. One of the concerns with raw dairy is there is a concern for contamination and secondary bacterial infection. That does occur. However, the frequency of that occurring is extremely low. The number of people in the United States that get sick from dairy contamination is vanishingly small. It's like less than 20 a year. Now, to be fair, a higher percentage of those people are consuming raw dairy, but it's such a small number. It's like, getting struck by lightning type of thing. And currently, if we look at the reasons why we went to pasteurization, ultra-pasteurization back in the day, we have probably, we clearly have better technology today where we can sort of assess and sample these products to better ensure that they are not contaminated. So I think there's some, potential benefit there where we're consuming raw dairy. I've had raw dairy, not a ton, but I've had it. Never had a problem with that. Different, again, outside of raw versus pasteurized. Again, some people will do better with butter. Some people do better with cream. Interestingly, when we look at, like the muscle building properties of dairy, there is a study showing that whole milk was superior to skim milk, even though the protein content was essentially the same. Whole milk, probably via having fat, cholesterol, which we know is anabolic, supported better muscle growth. So there's probably it's probably better to consume whole dairy than skim milk, probably, in my view. But again, you have to just be mindful of, are you going to overconsume this stuff? Is it going to lead to body fat accumulation? Body fat accumulation is something we do not want. There is, like I said, there's butter and there's ghee. And if you guys don't know, ghee is what they traditionally use in India. It is clarified butter. It has many of the milk solids removed from it. It's a very good product for cooking in. Nice flavor. It's pretty good high heat stability. I use it to cook with sometimes. The other thing people will talk about are A1 versus A2 dairy. So there's different proteins that are expressed in milk. Sheep, for instance, typically would display an A2 characteristic, and there's some milk you can buy in the store now that says A2. Some people may tolerate it better than others. Most of the research, people talk about this dairy inflammatory. Most of the research basically shows it's not inflammatory. Most of the research on dairy shows that it is not contributing to heart disease. Most of the research shows that people have better outcomes when they consume dairy of various different types. So in general, again, there's always fringe studies on either side, but the majority of the literature shows that dairy is probably a good, healthful product for the majority of people. Now, let's talk about, within the carnivore community, there are people that have various sensitivities and diseases, autoimmune diseases, on and on and on. And for some people, dairy just doesn't work for them. It doesn't make sense. My consumption, I do consume dairy from time to time. I typically, like when I want to be my leanest, I don't consume dairy. I think more than anything is from a caloric standpoint, right? It's very easy for me or for a lot of people, just to overconsume calories when you consume dairy. Now, if you're limited, say one cup of milk a day, and that's all you do, and you're very disciplined about that, it's probably fine. If you're the type of person that, you get a little piece of cheese and you can't stop eating it, or you decide, hey, I'm gonna take some of this heavy cream and make a dessert out of it. The same old keto trap where you're just making all these high fat, fat bombs. You guys remember saw this stuff about fat bombs. Eat the fat bomb. Suppress your appetite, right? Yeah. Well, what it often do is just provide you unnecessary fat that you're not going to utilize. I think when we're looking at foods to eat, again, prioritizing protein is incredibly important with sufficient fat to provide long-term satiety, as we mentioned in the last video, and go from there. And as far as the carbohydrates in there, this was one of the reasons I called this a carnivore diet, because it was animal products, as opposed to a zero carb diet, which many people were referring to. And it was very confusing, because they were consuming dairy has carbohydrates, they were consuming eggs have a small amount of carbohydrate, and yet they're calling it zero carbs. So that's one of the reasons I named it the carnivore diet. For you guys that don't know that, I was the guy that came up with the carnivore diet, wrote the book called The Carnivore Diet, and now it's become common parlance for this style of eating, this animal-based eating. All right, guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you consume dairy? Do you have trouble with different types of dairy? Are you a raw dairy person? Can you do better with butter and ghee versus drinking straight up milk? And are you able to? Does it cause weight gain for you? All right, guys, we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.